College. This is a cultural series concert entitled Women's Work, and we're delighted that you can share it with us. This evening's program began as a really great and enthusiastic yes for Sara and Jeni and I when we were asked to play. We've never actually played together, all three of us at the same time, so it's a real treat. We would like to acknowledge the support of the Bosted family in helping us to provide these concerts for the community. And we would also like to remind you to please take a moment to silence your devices at the beginning of the program so that we don't have any unintentional chamber music. So the program this evening, the title Women's Work is simply because all of the pieces are composed by women. We wanted to provide a fresh perspective instead of having a piece by a woman on a program with other pieces. We wanted to give you a taste of all music by women. The women this evening come from the 17th century through the present. And they do represent, to be fair, they do represent some of the most privileged and affluent people from those centuries. So it's not really a representation of all women of all times. Most of the women whose music you will hear tonight come from musical dynasties, families where music was the bread and butter, and they were trained from a very early age. Almost all of them were considered child prodigies. And all of them did compose, but all of them also left relatively few pieces given their stature as musicians. So the interesting question might be why do women leave so little music behind? And I'm sure if you had each of them here this evening, you could ask them, and they have multiple reasons why they didn't have enough time to write more than they did. But we're grateful that we have the pieces that we do, and we're looking forward to exploring them with you. Music is also, like a lot of the work that women historically, traditionally have done, it's also somewhat ephemeral. A lot of the work of being a mother and a wife just goes away as time goes on. And music, before the advent of written music certainly, and also before the advent of recorded music, was also very transient in time. So it's maybe a phenomenon that women could appreciate, not being able to preserve anything that you do in real time. Maybe the music, maybe the images, maybe the words that you're going to read on the screen tonight, which are words that were offered to us by women of all ages who listened to the program for us and gave us their verbal response. Maybe some of these things will intrigue you. Maybe some of them will make you uncomfortable. They might even offend you. But whatever your position, whatever your posture, whatever your response to this music and to these images that are also by women and the words chosen by women of all ages in response to this music, I hope that you'll join us as we co-create this program together. We need you to listen, and we need you to participate in giving us the program. Thank you. right into a family of musicians. She played for Louis XIV when she was 5 years old. She was invited to be a court musician in her teens. And then she got married at 19 and was disinvited from being a court musician, but she continued to perform and to teach and to compose. She suffered a string of personal tragedies. She lost in succession her mother, her father, her husband, and her only child, her 10-year-old son, and then stopped composing for a period of about 10 years. The piece that you just heard was the first piece that she self-published after that period of mourning and grief. The style that you just heard being played on the digital harpsichord, and we're grateful for the digital harpsichord, it doesn't need nearly as much tuning as a regular harpsichord, is called basso continuo, and that is the violin part is written out, the cello part is written out, and the keyboard player or the person who can play chords, which might have been a lute also, is expected to improvise based on the figuration that's placed under the bass line. So for all you theory students, it really does matter that you know the difference between a 6/5 and a 4/3. This is how we make the music happen. So that's about as close to jazz as you'll ever hear me get. By the time that Elisabeth died in 1729, she was at the top of her game. She was recognized in a book that listed all of the top-tier musicians and poets in France at the time, and she was listed as second only to Jean-Baptiste Lully, which is quite the honor. So now we'll switch gears to another woman from not necessarily a musical dynasty, but with a very strong parents. Clara Schumann, Clara Wieck, was also a gifted prodigy. She was a pianist, and her father was her teacher, and he was a piece of work. She was on track to be a concert pianist, and she was a gifted composer also. In fact, if you were here for the previous Culture Series recital, Kanuzowski played one of her preludes and fugues. And then she, too, got married. Robert came to study with her father, and she fell in love. And at 21, against her father's wishes, not only against them, but against his court order, he sued them to not get married. They got married. And then between the age of 21 and 35, she had 8 children, which might have put the crimps to the practicing, although it didn't seem to have affected her career necessarily. She stepped back to have the children, but she also continued to perform and was respected as a chamber musician and soloist, and she championed, in particular, her husband's work. They were very close. They were a deeply loving couple. They were musical together. They traded ideas back and forth. They incorporated little bits and pieces of each other's music as tributes to one another. And the piece that Jeni and I are going to play was written in July of 1853 as a gift from Clara to Robert for his birthday, which had been the previous month. She was heavily pregnant at that point with their 8th child, and she performed this piece, and shortly thereafter Robert was committed to an asylum. He had attempted to take his own life, and he stayed there until his death, early death in 1856, leaving Clara with 7 surviving children and not many prospects. Contrary to the gossip that you may have heard, no, this piece is not written for Brahms. In fact, she hadn't even met Brahms yet. He wouldn't come onto the scene until later in 1853. So what you're about to hear is really a love letter, a birthday card to Robert from Clara. I think tender and warm and offering all of the things that they shared together, both in partnership and as musicians. phrase about Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire that she did everything we did but backwards and in high heels. That's how it feels to play these pieces. Clara was such a supporter of her soloist. The next piece is by Nadia Boulanger, who was one of two sisters who were both very gifted composers. She was, again, born into something of a musical dynasty, and she also had a very controlling parent. This time it was the mother who pushed her and her younger sister Lily to excel in musical arts, and she entered the Paris Conservatory when she was just a teenager. She was already sort of a showboat at that point, both in piano and in composition. She was fully expected to win the Prix de Rome, which is the big composition prize, but she bucked the jury. They gave her a melody and said, write a vocal fugue, and she wrote a string quartet instead. So they disallowed her to win. And she said, whatever, and went on. Her sister would come along a few years later and actually win the prize. Nadia developed a romantic and musical partnership with a man who was 35 years her senior. And his name was Raul Puño, and they toured together as pianists, and they composed together. They were working on an opera together. And she was very much reliant on him, I would say. And he died unexpectedly while they were on tour in Moscow, and shortly after that, her sister Lily died, tragically young. And these two blows really set her back, and she stepped back from performing. She stepped back in particular from composing, and she became a teacher. And she became one of the greatest composition teachers of the 20th century. In fact, one of her students, Virgil Thompson, said that she was a sort of musical midwife, and another one of her relatively famous students, Aaron Copland, called her the most famous living composition teacher. But he actually doubted whether she was a serious composer. She didn't seem to take herself very seriously as a composer. She championed disappearing into the music and sort of letting the music speak for itself, which was maybe a survival strategy in a man's world. And she really didn't have much respect for her own early compositions, which we're going to play one. These three pieces were written in 1914, the year that her partner died. She called her own early work useless. I would beg to disagree. So this particular set of pieces, you can hear what she wants, but it was written shortly after her partner died. And it's certainly an expression of music that is disappearing as the world is just teetering on the brink of the Great War, World War I. second half of the program with a piece by a living composer, Meira Warshauer. She is someone who works across a wide range of styles and media, and her music has been performed, recorded, broadcast, and commissioned to really great acclaim. Bracha is a musical interpretation of the Jewish concept of blessing, and it's related to the word Bracha, which is a pool of water or a flowing stream. And she talks particularly about the opening motive in the violin being something that comes down, and then at the end of the piece you'll hear that it's returned back. In addition to being a composer, Meira Warshauer is also an active environmentalist. Some of her music is composed specifically for environmental groups. And she also teaches on the experience of music as a source of healing. And she says this of her own music. It's nice to have a living composer's words. She says, "Each listener brings their personal experience and emotional receptors to the music. Their attention is a sacred trust. I may be inspired by a specific event and emotion, but I hope my listener will receive what they need and what touches them most in the moment." glorious Rebecca Clarke also had a stern and controlling Victorian father. She had a difficult childhood, but she was a child prodigy and she was a violinist. She was poised for success. She went to the Royal College of Music at the age of 17 and left almost immediately because her harmony teacher proposed to marry her. She then turned around and went back to college, to the Royal College of Music again in 1907, and she was the first female composition student of Charles Stanford, and he was the one who suggested to her that she might be better served by switching from violin to viola, not because there would be more work, but because she would be a better composer if she played an instrument that was inside, in the middle of the texture of the music. Rebecca Clarke also stood close to 6 feet tall, so it was kind of a natural thing to play the larger viola, which can be difficult to handle. She left the Royal College, however, when, I don't know if it was when she became a viola player, but she left the college because her father revoked his blessing. And she just couldn't stay. He wouldn't support her. So she went on the road. She became one of the first orchestral viola players as a woman. She was a chamber musician of great renown, and her compositions were widely respected and played. She could sell out Wigmore Hall with her own compositions. She premiered a viola sonata in 1919, which was so spectacular that when it was entered in a competition running up against Ernst Bloch, the jury was deadlocked. And because it was an anonymous submission, they really were trying to decide which piece was better. And when they found out that the viola sonata was by a woman, they decided that the Bloch should be the winner. Actually, until that point, they thought it was by Ravel, so think about that. She ended up stranded in America during World War II. She came to the States and then couldn't get back to Britain. And she made do gigging, and she became a governess. And she also met, again, a classmate from the Royal College, and they got married. She married at the age of 58, so she never had any children. But after her marriage, she stopped performing, she stopped composing. She just said she couldn't do it. Largely at this point, her style of tonal composition was falling out of favor. In any case, serialism was on the rise. But still, she just decided that it was something that if she couldn't devote herself entirely to it, she didn't want to do it at all. Some people like to think she maybe had depression, and she just says, no, I would sooner be regarded as a 16th-rate composer than have to separate things into professional and amateur, into the world of men and the world of women. Her piano trio, which we're going to play, was written in 1921, which is just after the end of the Great War. The Boulanger was written just as that was getting underway. And so this war was particularly devastating for the population of Great Britain. The trench warfare took the flower of their male youth, largely. The war was difficult on every level, and the aftermath wasn't much better. So this piece was quite possibly in response to the agonies, to the horrors, and also the delusions that allowed a Second World War to come right on the heels of the First.